Hi, I'm Louisa Sijabat, a liquidator and bankruptcy trustee. So today's question is a little bit involved. It is that there is a company, it has a court judgment debt against it. All the company does is act as trustee of a trust. However, the trust's name is not on the judgment, and there's no indication on the judgment that this judgment is the company as trustee for a trust. It simply says the company's name. If that company was placed into liquidation, perhaps if there was a change of trustee, would there be any recourse to the trust property, or is that the end of the debt because it only names the company as the company? So, a few critical points. This company acts as trustee of the trust and only as trustee of the trust, as in it does not trade in its own right. So if this company was placed into liquidation, it is assumed there are no assets that are owned in its own right because it only acts as trustee of the trust. Even if it has assets registered in its name, it's in its capacity as trustee of the trust. Now, typically, according to most trust deeds, a trustee and even a former trustee of a trust will typically have a right of indemnity out of trust assets or out of trust property. This means even if the company goes into liquidation, even though it doesn't own anything and hence can't pay this creditor or this judgment debt from its own assets, the company will typically have a right of indemnity to trust assets or trust property that a liquidator would typically notice and usually pursue recovery. Now, if this debt is incurred solely in the company's capacity as trustee for the trust, because it doesn't act in its own right or trade in its own right, then the liquidator would typically seek payment of that debt in full, plus the cost of the liquidation from the trust property. Typically, if there is also a former trustee, as in if there had been a change of trustee and then the now old trustee is put into liquidation, typically the right of indemnity includes former trustees to the extent they were acting as trustee of the trust for the period that they were trustee. So typically that right of indemnity would still exist, and there would usually be the ability for a liquidator to request or require payment from the trust and its assets or property.